Abandon your foolish quest. All that awaits you is the wrath of my master. You are too late to save the child. Now you will join him.
Fans of the Diablo series are already intimately familiar with the horrors that transpired neath the cathedral during the events of Diablo 1. However, perhaps the most vile and heinous of crimes committed was the Archbishop Lazarus kidnapping the young Prince Albrecht to become an unwitting host for the Lord of Terror. However, these events that play out like a waking nightmare were never actually seen in game and only fully elaborated upon in the game's manual. So here is the untold truth of everything leading up to Albrecht's possession and the terror he experienced off screen during the events of Diablo 1. Centuries before the events of Diablo 1, deep beneath the Cathedral of Tristram, the Lord of Terror was trapped by the Herodic Order in a soul stone to lay imprisoned forever. However, over time, the Herodic Order faded into obscurity, and a new power had taken up residence in the sleepy town of Tristram, led by King Leoric of the Zakharum faith, hailing from Khazestan. Leoric brought with him his family, knights and priests, the latter two groups forming his Order of the Light, along with his advisor Lazarus, who Mephisto had been subtly corrupting to prompt the king's journey to new lands in an effort to free his brother, which we will expound upon later. It's then Leoric and his entourage made their way to the town of Tristram, appropriating the decrepit monastery on the outskirts of his new seat of power. Upon their arrival, Diablo quickly asserted full dominance over Leoric's right hand, the Archbishop Lazarus, and together they set about creating a series of unfortunate events that would degrade Leoric, making him susceptible for Diablo to gain control of the pious king. In efforts, he would become a vessel for the Lord of Terror. And what better victims formed to assume? As Mephisto was corrupting the Zakharum back in Khazestan, Diablo himself was free to assume the form of a deeply religious king of the Zakharum faith, with an army to command and perhaps corrupt as his own servants. Unfortunately, the Lord of Terror had somewhat overestimated his abilities during his long sleep inside the Soul Stone. In Diablo's weakened state, he couldn't dominate such a stalwart spirit such as Leoric, and was forced to relinquish his control over the king. But Leoric's soul was corrupted, and his mind left crazed. These events left Leoric ordering the butchering of half of his town, and he himself being slain by his own men just to end his madness.
Keep your distance from him. This burden is mine to bear. May death bring peace from your madness, Leoric.
Traitors! Even in death the armies of Khanduras will still obey their king, even if you will not.
Diablo, now without a much-needed host to travel east and meet his brothers, had already begun his search throughout Khanduras for a perfect and susceptible vessel to act as his focus, and found such a soul easily within reach that would not be able to resist his control. ANEW, Prince of Darkness. Enjoined by his Dark Master, Lazarus kidnapped Albrecht, the youngest son of Leoric, and dragged the terrified youth down into the blackness of the labyrinth, flooding the boy's defenseless mind with the essence of pure terror. Diablo easily took possession of the young Albrecht. Pain and fire raced through the child's very soul. Hideous laughter filled his head and clouded his thoughts. Paralyzed with fear, Albrecht felt the presence of Diablo within his mind as it seemed to push him down deeper and deeper into darkness and oblivion. Diablo gazed upon his surroundings through the eyes of the young prince. A lustful hunger still tortured the demon after his frustrating bout for control over Leoric, but the nightmares of the boy provided ample substance to sate him. Reaching deep into Albrecht's subconscious, Diablo ripped the greatest fears of the child from their hiding places and gave them breath. Albrecht watched as if out of a dream. Twisted and disfigured forms appeared all around him. Unholy writhing visages of terror danced about him, chanting choruses of obscenities. All of the monsters that he'd ever imagined or believed that he'd seen in his life became flesh and were given life before him. Large bodies comprised of living rock erupted from the walls and bowed to their dark master. The ancient skeletal corpses of the Horodrim rose from the archaic crypts and lumbered off into the red-washed corridors beyond. As the cacophony of madness and nightmares hammered its final blow against Albrecht's shattered spirit, the bloodlusted ghouls and demons of his mind scattered and scrambled maniacally into the lengthening passageways of his waking nightmare. The ancient catacombs of the Horodrim had become a twisted labyrinth of raw, focused terror. Empowered by Diablo's possession of young Albrecht, the creatures of the boy's own imagination had gained corporeal form. So strong was the terror that grew inside of Albrecht that the borders of the mortal realm began to warp and tear. The burning hells began to seep into the world of man and take root within the labyrinth. Beings and occurrences displaced by time and space and long lost to history of man were pulled screaming into the ever-expanding domain. The body of Albrecht, fully possessed by Diablo, began to distort and change. The small boy grew and his eyes blazed as tendril-like spines ripped through his flesh. Great arched horns erupted from Albrecht's skull as Diablo altered the form of the child to match that of his demonic body. Deep within the recesses of the labyrinth, a growing power was being harnessed, and when the moment was right, Diablo was now poised to venture out once more into the mortal world and free his captive brothers Mephisto and Baal. The primevals would be reunited, and together they would reclaim their rightful place in hell.
Arise, Diablo, Lord of Terror.
The reign of Diablo. These occurrences were unbeknownst to the townsfolk of Tristram. To them, the Black King lay dead, slain at the hands of his own priests and knights, and the young Albrecht was still missing. And the proud defenders of Khanduras were no more. The people of Tristram looked about their lifeless town and were greatly dismayed. Awash in feelings of both relief and remorse, they soon realized that their troubles had merely begun. Strange, eerie lights appeared in the darkened windows of the monastery. Misshapen, leathery-skinned creatures were seen venturing forth from the shadows of the church. Horrible, wounded cries seemed to linger on the wind, emanating from deep underground. It quickly became apparent something quite unnatural had infested the once holy site. Travelers on the roads surrounding Tristram were accosted by cloaked riders that now seemed to constantly roam the deserted countryside. Many villagers fled Tristram, making their way to other towns or even kingdoms, fearing some unnamed evil that seemed to wait in the shadows all around them. Those few who chose to remain seldom ventured out at night and never tread foot upon the grounds of the cursed monastery. Whispered rumors of poor innocent people being abducted in the night by wicked, nightmarish creatures filled the halls of the local inn. With no king, no law, and no army left to defend them, many of the townsfolk began to fear an attack from things that now dwelt beneath the town. It was then the Archbishop Lazarus, frayed and disheveled, returned from his absence and assured the townsfolk that he too had been ravaged by the growing evil of the monastery. With the desperate need for reassurance clouding their good judgment, Lazarus whipped the townspeople into a frenzied mob, reminding them that Prince Albrecht was still unaccounted for, and he persuaded many of the men to follow him into the depths of the monastery to search for the boy. The townsfolk gathered their torches and soon the night air glowed with the flickering light of hope. They armed themselves with shovels, picks and scythes, and so prepared, they boldly followed the treacherous archbishop straight into the fiery maw of the newly created hell itself. The few who survived that horrible fate that awaited them then returned to Tristram and recounted what they could of the ordeal.
Please, listen to me. The Archbishop Lazarus. He led us down here to find the lost prince. The bastard led us into a trap. Now everyone is dead, killed by a demon he called the Butcher. Avenge us! Find this Butcher and slay him, so that our souls may finally rest.
Your death will be avenged.
Their wounds were terrible, and even the skills of the healer could not save some of them. As the stories of demons and devils spread, a stifling primal terror began to consume the hearts of all of the town's inhabitants. It was a terror none of them had ever known. Deep beneath the foundations of the ruined monastery, Prince Albrecht was no more. Now completely overwhelmed by the Lord of Terror, Diablo gorged himself upon the fears of the mortals above. He slowly sank back into the welcoming shadows and began to harness his depleted power. He smiled to himself in the sheltering darkness, for he knew that the time of his final victory was fast approaching. What Diablo may or may not have known was that a warrior, Albrecht's brother Prince Aidan, had returned from war, entering the darkened monastery in an attempt to find and rescue the prince. It was there that Lazarus was encountered by and defeated at the unholy altar.
Your madness ends here, betrayer.
But the adventurers only found a different child sacrificed by Lazarus as an offering to Diablo himself.
Your story is quite grim, my friend. Lazarus will surely burn in hell for his horrific deed. The boy that you describe is not our prince, but I believe that Albrecht may yet be in danger. The symbol of power that you speak of must be a portal in the very heart of the labyrinth. Know this, my friend. The evil that you move against is the Dark Lord of Terror. He is known to mortal men as Diablo. It was he who was imprisoned within the labyrinth many centuries ago, and I fear that he seeks to once again sow chaos in the realm of mankind. You must venture through the portal and destroy Diablo before it is too late.
Unwilling to give up hope, the hero sought out, encountered, and eventually vanquished the Lord of Terror. Diablo let out a tortured scream. Deckard Cain said he could have sworn he heard a child scream in the midst of the terrible roar. Kneeling down beside the defeated primeval, Aidan used a small blade to remove the soul stone from Diablo's forehead. But what he had discovered was Diablo's body transformed back into that of his fallen brother, Prince Albrecht, who then gasped his final breath. The innocent prince lay dead, and Deckard Cain would later speculate that Aidan, upon seeing his brother's body before him, would have shattered his mind as he himself plunged Diablo's soul stone into his own head in an effort to contain the evil that had destroyed his entire family. But unbeknownst to the brave prince, it seemed Diablo was poised to become more powerful than ever.